Variation 2 introduces the invisible join, which is both flat and invisible from both the knit and purl sides. This means you can break a lengthy selvage into smaller segments, and when finished, the crochet edging appears seamless. Although the edging techniques are similar to Variation 1, there are some subtle differences, so pay close attention to the details. In Part 1, you learned 3 key skills: how to determine the number of stitches a border requires to lay perfectly flat, 2, how to perfectly pick up the stitches along the selvage so there is no flaring holes or gaps, and 3, how to machine knit Variation 1, which creates the crochet edging on the selvage when you have plenty of needles to span the entire edge. This is our launching point for Part 2.
Here we did this straight across without any seam in it. And now we're going to do the other side of the selvage edge.
Variation 2 and the invisible join are designed for when the selvage requires more stitches than the number of needles on your machine, or you want to change colors on the edging. Either way, the edging will require one or more joins. For this demonstration, I am going to work just one join because I want you to see how both segments work together to make the invisible join. First, do the measure-in calculations to determine how many stitches are needed along the selvage. Since this is the other side of our swatch, we already know we need 43 stitches. Then, divide this number by the number of segments desired. In this case, we will have only 2 segments, but the segments do not ever need to be equal in size. In this example, I decided to have 21 in the first segment and 22 in the second segment. Pull up the needles for the first segment. That's the one that'll be on the left.
We're going to put our needle stopper in place, and we're going to make a little V and latch over loosely over to the other side, to the right side. And on the other side, I have my carriage already waiting for this yarn. My carriage is set to knit in both directions. The tension is set to 8.1, which is my tension for this. Now, on this one, here's the difference. Instead of putting the last loop onto the last needle, we are going to continue and latch around that last needle. Okay? Then I'm going to pull out one more needle, and I'm going to put that loop on that needle. But normally when we do this, we bring this yarn between the second and the first needle on the end and down and under. We're not going to do that. We are going to put our yarn right above that because I do not want it to automatically wrap. Okay? Okay, once I have my latching on, I can leave my stopper in place, and I'm going to find about the halfway point. If you have a longer piece, just measure and mark the different points. Now remember, I have one extra needle here. I don't want to knit that needle. So I'm going to find my halfway point, which is about here, and I'm going to hang it on the second needle from the end, and I'm going to go over and pick up one more stitch just to stabilize that edge. On this side here, pick up that end loop of the last stitch and the prominent loop right there and put that there. See how there's one stitch that sticks up? I tend to use that as the one that is predominant, and I put those on the end needles. That's 4 or 5 needles from the edge.
Hang the remaining edge stitches just like you did for Variation 1. Find the middle of the middle and so on until all the needles are filled. Then begin the checks. Pull down on the knitting and check to make sure 2 needles do not go into the same stitch. Hang any leftover knots and loops on the closest needle, making sure no more than 2 stitches are on any one needle. And lastly, make sure that only the outer half of the stitches were picked up.
So now I can push this back. Now this is going to be a tight row when I knit it, okay, just so you know. But all my stitches are behind my latches. I'm going to take and remove my stopper, and I have one more thing I need to do. My carriage is in knit right now. I'm going to move it to hold position, which means nothing would knit if I left all these needles
In hold position.
The only needle that I don't want to knit is this end needle, and I'm going to push everything else into upper work position. And my yarn is over this needle, so it's not going to wrap that needle either. Now, I can knit one row. Oh, that wasn't so bad. I was expecting it to be harder. Okay, so I just did my very first row. Now, the stitch on this needle, I'm just going to take a little stitch marker and pull that stitch right out. Okay, and put the marker on it. Then I go back to working the edging just like before. So I have a few more rows of crochet edging to go on. So I pull my stoppers out, push my knitting back, bring it out a little bit, unthread my carriage, quick review, go behind the knitting and latch all the way to the right. Now I'm going to only latch to the end where I have my stitches. This needle I will put on the very next loop because I have that extra needle in place. But this yarn comes over the top of that needle. Remove my stopper, set my carriage to hold so that I can just go across. And actually I just left my carriage in hold, and I'm going to leave it in hold again. I'm going to take my yarn and thread up my carriage so I'm ready to go on the next row. But there's one more thing I need to do. Since I'm in hold, none of these will knit, except I'm going to bring them into upper work position. So this is how you do it. Now this yarn, because it's over that needle, it won't knit and it won't wrap that end needle. There we go. So I have my second row. And I'm going to take my stitch marker and just drop that stitch off. So what happens is I have these two little loops here. But let me explain why I put them into hold position and hold that. Because what that does is it locks the tension down on these loops perfectly. Okay, so those loops will be uniform in size. And I'm just going to go back, bring out that extra needle again, the empty extra needle on the end, and unthread my carriage, bring it up between the second and the first, and latch across. Okay, I'm going around the last needle that has a stitch. I'm bringing this loop up and putting it on that last needle. Leave the yarn above the knitting, push everything back, take the stopper off. My carriage remained in hold, so I can just do a free pass over to the right, thread up. Before I knit the next row, push these back to upper work position, except for that end one. And the yarn is above it, and knit one row. I'm going to take this stitch off this needle, put a stitch marker in it, and take that stitch off. Now that was row 3, which means I have one more row to go before I do the bind off.
I'll meet you then.
That's my 4th, which means I'm going into bind off mode. To do the perfect edge, what I need to do is I need to turn this knitting. So I put my stopper on it, I unthread my carriage. So now that I have my weights into place, I can just push my knitting back. It puts the stitches behind the latches and opens the latches. I'm going to put my garter bar right into place, bring this forward to get the latches to close, then pull it off on to the garter bar. Open the latches by pushing forward toward the bed and bring the yarn around front. And now I'm going to rehang this knitting. And what I'm doing is I'm looking down my channels, right down these little channels on my garter bar, making sure everything was cleared, and take my garter bar out. I've just turned. Now I can push my knitting back behind the latches because I am going to bind off around the gate pegs.
Remove the stopper plate from the needle bed and grab your latch tool and yarn.
So, a couple things are happening automatically. I'm going to pull down some extra slack in my yarn so it's not too tight. I'm going to put my yarn around my fingers and I'm going to put it around the first gate peg. That's the one that's adjacent to the end needle. I'm going to put the hook of my latch tool in the hook of the first needle. And I'm going to take my thumb and finger, index finger, and push the needle back, and it will transfer automatically onto my latch tool. I'm going to push my latch tool up so I can come up and grab that yarn, and the stitch has gone behind the latch on the latch tool. Pull that through. When I do the second stitch, I'm putting the hook of my latch tool in the hook of the needle, and I'm bringing it through. And now I have 2 loops behind the latch, and I'm going to catch my yarn around the gate peg, see how it's around the gate peg, and pull that through. Let's do another one. I'm bringing it back and I'm catching the loop. Pull it through. There we go. When we get to the end, we can cut our yarn, but don't pull the loop through. But before you take it off the latch tool, put it on to a marker. Now, we can take our weights off, we can take our hardware off, and look at what we have. A perfect edge, halfway across. But now, let's talk about how we're going to get this to work perfectly to join it. This is where the invisible join comes in. I've set myself up for an invisible join.
Once the first segment is off the machine, pull out the needles for the next segment. Put the needle stopper in place to stabilize the needles. In this case, it is 22 needles. With the knit side of the selvage facing the machine, begin on the left. Skip the first stitch along the selvage edge and begin filling the edge needle with the next stitch. Then hang one more stitch to anchor this side. This skip stitch provides ease and will fall directly below the marked loops when the invisible seam is completed. If you did not allow for the ease, the edging will pucker at the seam. On the right, anchor a few stitches. In this case, they are the border stitches. Continue to hang the remaining stitches by finding stitches at the half of the half, and so on, until all the stitches are hung. Then pull down on the knitting and complete the checks for holes and gaps. I'll meet you then. There we go. The stitches are all hung. Now it's time to do the crochet cast on. When I do the invisible join, it is better to do the first row of latching after the knitting is hung because the needles help support the knitting and the loops are less prone to stretch. From behind the knitting, insert the latch tool in the loop with the first marker. This is the one that is closest to the main knitting. There are 5 crochet cast-on rows on the right edge of the previous segment, and each marker holds the end loop from each of them. Making sure not to twist this loop, bring the hook up between the left 2 needles and catch a new piece of feeder yarn to begin the latching. Latch across the needles. The yarn tail can be laid over the first needle. If there are additional segments to work, you would bring up an extra needle on the right to form a new set of marked loops as you work the crochet cast-on rows. But in this case, this is the last segment, so you would continue until there is just 1 needle remaining. Place the loop from the latch tool on this needle and bring the feeder yarn between the end 2 needles and under the end needle and off to the right. Remove the needle stopper, take a free pass to move the carriage to the right if it's not there already, and knit 1 row. Now I'm going to repeat this whole process until 4 crochet cast on rows are completed. The 5th row is reserved for the bind off. But right now, let's take one more look at the beginning of the crochet cast on row so you can see up close how the invisible join is formed. Remove the marker from the first row if you haven't already. Bring the latch tool behind the knitting and pick up the next loop on the right edge of the prior segment. Making sure not to twist the loop, bring the feeder yarn under the end needle and the hook of the latch tool between the end 2 working needles and begin latching across the entire row. On the right edge, because this is the last segment, put the loop on the last needle and the feeder yarn between the last 2 needles and under the end needle to the right. Finish the process with a free pass to move the carriage to the right and knit 1 row.
That was my fourth row. This is where I need to turn my knitting. So I'm going to drop my stopper in place, push the knitting back to open all the latches, get my garter bar. I've added my weights already, and I think I'm going to add one more weight just to be on the safe side on this end. Okay, bring it forward. Now, I do have a whole video on garter bar work. There we go. Now, I should have unthreaded my machine though, because I have to turn my work. Okay, now I'm going to push it on, and you can feel it, and it already went on perfectly. And I'm going to drop my garter bar off. I still have this single loop over here, so I'm going to pick that loop up, take off my marker, and begin my crochet cast off with that loop, making sure it's not twisted. So I have a couple things going here. So I'm putting my yarn around the gate peg. I have a loop to start me off on, and I'm going to go and grab the first hook just like before and bind off around the gate peg. But I just pick up that loop. Then I'm going to continue across this bed. So I'm down to my last 2 on this end. I'm just grabbing them. I can just cut this yarn. I like to leave a 10-inch yarn tail whenever I'm doing these edges because you never know what you might find at the very end. So there's our invisible join. Can't you see it? It's right there where this yarn comes out. This is what it looks like on the back side. And this part, this line is the carrying thread that we carried up the side. And you pull that one tight and thread up the outside one. I'm going to pick up the first loop of the carrying threads and whip stitch it. I'm coming in from this side, pick up the next loop over here, then go to the next loop here, and just whip stitch it. And when I pull it, it flattens it out and it makes it nearly disappear. I can come up to here, pick up the next loop here, and this one here. The next loop here, and this one here. Now can you see how that really, it looks just like the purl stitch. You don't want to pull it too tight, but just enough that it lays the stitches down, and then you take your final stitch right there. Now, it's just a matter of weaving these 2 ends in. And it is flat. See how that's flat from both sides? You don't even see it. And once it goes in the wash once, if you didn't point it out, nobody would see it. That's it. That is the invisible join.
I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please take a moment to subscribe and ring the bell to receive notifications of upcoming videos and events. Happy machine knitting!